Hello, friends that I made this for. How are you? If you've never been here before, welcome. My name is Lauren. I am a Philadelphia-based Reiki practitioner, astrologer, and tarot type person. Welcome again. If you've been here before, you already know the deal, and if you were just scouring YouTube trying to find something to help it give you some insight onto this season, that is Cancer season, welcome. You came to the right, or at least interesting place. I like to talk about astrology through the tarot to kind of give us a point of contact and reference, an energy we can tap into to maybe help us understand a little better what we're already collectively tapping into. So with that said, let's dive into Cancer season. Cancer season in the tarot is the Chariot. So we'll be talking about the Chariot today. A little forward before that, I just wanted to throw out there, as I'm not an expert in any way. Anything that I share is stuff that I either learned from a class, a teacher, or from a book. So this is all information that you can tap into at any time. You might not agree with everything that I say about a card or this card in particular, and that's perfectly fine. This is, of course, my personal interpretation, and your interpretation can, will, and should be different. So with that said, let's really dive into what's happening in the world, or at least in the stars. One thing I want to just preface is that what's happening astrologically is going to show up for everyone differently, as always. But there's actually a whole lot that's happening right now. Cancer always falls in eclipse season, so it can feel very energizing, very emotional, and it might feel like a lot is going on. Not to say that there isn't a lot going on in general. We are in the middle of a lot historically. And I mean that from an astrological sense and just a reality that we live in sense. Not to make things political, but they're political. So we are living in a crazy time. And if you look at how many planets are in retrograde, it can help us understand that a little deeper. There's big themes that are coming out for all of us, or at least most of us right now. So if things are feeling extra strange, that might be why. Of course, everything is going to resonate with you or me completely differently, depending on our astrological charts. So as I talk about just the Chariot today, because that's all I'm talking about today, is the Chariot and how it relates to Cancer, know that we are in a serious time of development as human beings, culture, and coming to terms with karmic cycles. I'll make videos about that in a future video. But for today, having said that we acknowledged it, let's dive into what the Chariot means, or at least what it can mean to you. As always, I like to go through 3 cards to kind of dive into what we can see through different cards, what we might recognize as similar, and also what might be different depending on an artist's interpretation. So one thing we're going to dive into, of course, and what's going to be interesting to reflect on, is what's similar about all 3 cards. But each card, I think, gives us a good invitation. Now, I'm actually taking a class, an online course right now by Lindsay Mack, which if you don't follow her, Tarot for the Wild Soul, her podcast is amazing. I would recommend getting your information from her as well. But I'm taking a class from her where she literally has said, don't go with what you see. Well, today we're going to go over what we see, and that's usually what I do anyway, so sorry if that doesn't resonate with you. Totally cool. But with all that preface and preface and everything else aside, we're going to be looking at the Chariot through the Morgan Greer Tarot, the Fountain Tarot, and last but not least, the most recent tarot of the 3, it's going to be Apparition, a Spirit Speak Tarot. And I'm looking at the deck because sometimes I forget that That's what it's called. So all three of these decks are not the original representations of the Chariot. But I've kind of intuitively picked them because I feel like they represent what the Chariot might be inviting us right now. So some of what I'm going to say is going to be classical interpretation, but some of what I'm going to say is how I am personally expanding on this idea to relay to what's happening now. Because a lot is happening now. We are collectively doing shadow work, right? We as a society are acknowledging how we do not treat each other the same and how that has become a systemic issue. So, with that said, let's see what the Chariot has to offer. And let's see how many people can either agree or disagree with me in one video. Like, thumbs up, and subscribe, yeah! So the first Chariot we're going to look at is going to be the most classic version. But as I said, this is not the classic interpretation. For that, you would look at the Smith Rider-Waite or any Smith-Waite interpretation. That is going to be kind of where you can get a real baseline. But with that said, we're looking at the Chariot right now in this moment through the Morgan Greer Tarot. So what do we notice right away? Right away, we can see a rider on the Chariot. We can see two horses pulling said chariot, one that is black, one that is white. We can also see that this person in the chariot is wearing a crown of stars. We'll also notice that there is some fabric in the wind and there's a lot of movement. What's different from this chariot from the classic rendition is that this chariot is mobile, which is very different from the classic. In the classic version, there's actually two sphinxes rather than horses that are not moving. They're basically stone statues that are sitting there. The person is in the chariot, and the stars are actually on this part of the chariot, not necessarily the crown. But there's a few things that are still here that we can break up and kind of say, yes, this is big Cancer energy. But something that needs to be stated, something that needs to be reflected. The chariot is called the chariot, not the charioteer, not the chariot that's being pulled by horses. The chariot actually refers to simply what it's saying. It's the physical space in which the charioteer is sitting or standing in. It is the space that is inhabited. So we're not looking at the chariot as necessarily the horses or this man, this person. We're looking at the chariot as the constructs that we exist in. So that's kind of an interesting thing to tap into right away. We do see a very strong and forwardly masculine, though it doesn't need to be by any sense of the word, masculine figure, which can be confusing for some because Cancer is primarily attributed to being big mama energy, mama bear energy. But that's a limiting idea of Cancer. So let's dive into what we see and kind of dive in a little deeper. Because sometimes what we can see can be an invitation to look a little deeper. So with the chariot that we see here, we see that there are two horses that are pretty mobile. Except they don't have back legs. Is that intentional? Probably, because I think it relates back to the sphinxes that are immobile, rock, and not moving. One thing that we can take from the fact that it is a white horse and a black horse is this idea that perhaps we are looking at two ends of the spectrum, the shadow and the light. The chariot is mostly an invitation about how we are guarded, how we have moved through the world, and how we have moved through the world successfully. But the chariot in most depictions, and I think even here, because again, there's no second half to the horses, and the wheels look pretty big and heavy, is that the chariot is kind of an invitation to reflect on something. Maybe a structure that we're ready to move out of, right? Though there is some movement that's here, as far as the movement of the legs to these horses, they seem a little bit more real, a little bit more animated than, let's say, the natural, not natural, but the Sphinx versions. We still see here that this powerful person is still a little stuck. This person is someone of authority and someone strong in their power, right? They almost, in this depiction, remind me of the Emperor. So, what's another thing that we can tap into here? In the first line of the tarot, we start with the Magician as our number one. I mean, technically we start with the Fool, but the Fool follows us throughout, right? Right. So at this stage in the Fool's journey, we're actually at the end of the first line. And something to kind of tap into as far as astrology goes is we're kind of at that halfway point in our year, right? We've reached that halfway point where we're really tapping in and reflecting on what our structures are that have been helpful and, given us our success. And we're ready to step out and move forward. Something to think about when it comes to Cancer, when we're looking at this card, is that the Chariot is actually the shell. And just like any crustacean, the crab has to break free of its shell in order to continue to expand and grow. This is a level of discomfort. This is a time of being vulnerable, and it's a time of where a crab might need to hide so it doesn't get eaten, right? But what it's doing is necessary for personal growth. What's interesting about this reflection is, yes, this crab, we'll just call this person a crab, is at a good point in their life. But to stay at this point of their life would be to choose death. Because a crab that cannot continue to grow is not really reading as or growing into its full potential. But for us to grow into our full potential, there must be risk. So sometimes with the Chariot, the invitation is to leave what is comfortable. Some people in life might never move past the Chariot moment. We all hear about the people who have peaked in high school. It's an inability to, it's not that they peaked, it's an inability to step out of the Chariot and into a new shell. So in Cancer season, we see that there are things about this that look really great, really strong and powerful, but are actually rather limiting. This is a time to be vulnerable, right? We acknowledge, whoopsie doodles, I got comfortable in my growth and I have to do something uncomfortable again. And that's fine. It's fine to be met with that discomfort. It's fine to feel like, wow, what am I doing here? Because that's part of life. We're going to grow in and out of that space. We might have control over the reins and feel really strong in that. But Cancer season might be the invitation to let go of the reins, get out of the fucking thing, and go, yeah, it's time to move on. Which leads me to my next Chariot card. So we talked about that light and dark, right? Just a little bit. Chariot is a time to check our defenses, maybe see where we have become too filled with the defense and where to get up and go. When we look at the Fountain Tarot, it's an interesting play on that light and dark, right? That shadow and ego and really of where to go next. We see two horses again in this card, but the horses are looking in opposite directions. Their legs are pointed in opposite directions. So once again, are we moving forward or are we staying in place? And even though it feels like with horses rather than sphinxes, we should be moving, it kind of allows us to tap into, there's the illusion of movement. The invitation, like I said, and all of what happens in our life is an invitation. We can either choose yes to the invitation of change, or we can say, I'm not ready. Now, if we were to pass up on saying, I'm not ready too many times, yes, there is stagnation. But it's not to say necessarily that the chariot is, get out of the fucking truck and let's walk it out. But you might need to get out of the fucking truck and walk it out. First, we have to tap in and ask, is this chariot going anywhere? So with this chariot specifically, we see that light and darkness. Chariot can really be an invitation to look through our shadow, to look through our structures. Because when it comes to ego, we can create the chariot around us. Our ego might be creating a chariot so that we feel safe and we feel secure. Itchy nose. But it might not actually be what we need. The chariot is an invitation to say, yes, I am doing a great job. I've come so far, but it's time to graduate and move out of the house. It might also be a reminder that we are being immobile in our thoughts and feelings. If we're looking at the chariot through Cancer, we can see how we have mothered ourselves. We can sometimes be like, okay, sometimes we can be like, whatever, I'm trying my best. That's very Cancer. Whatever, I'm trying my best. How we mother ourselves, how we talk to ourselves, how we nurture ourselves. If you have a lot of Cancer placement, it can be, where are we being overly defensive, right? Or where are we finding ourselves stuck? Because we want to parent ourselves to the point of not letting ourselves get hurt. Ultimately, being up here might be safer than being in the abyss, but the abyss might have a good mirror for us to reflect on. So as we go through specifically what we're dealing with as a society, we have to start asking ourselves uncomfortable questions. Are my belief systems flawed? Do I think something that is not innately true? Do I think something that is actually innately harmful to others that don't look like me? Or do I believe in the system because it comforts me but doesn't give me space to grow? These are questions that can come up with the chariot, but also just as we're going through this eclipse season. Because face it, so many planets are in retrograde. So if you're not reflecting, if you don't feel like you're going backwards even a little bit, it might be time to pump the brakes, get out of the chariot, and look at it from a different perspective. Because things can feel really good right here. But if you were to get out and look from the perspective of us as the viewer, you can see that this ship ain't going nowhere. We're stuck because we're not looking forward. We're looking in two directions and not sure which path to take. And sometimes that means abandoning a certain ideology or abandoning certain structures and doing something uncomfortable. Maybe read a book that doesn't really resonate with you, but brings you some observable ideas from a different perspective than your own. But that leads me to our last card in the Chariot, to kind of dive in and to see what are other ways that we can see the Chariot in a collective sense. So here we have the Apparition Spirit Speak Tarot, the card for the Chariot. And I find this one really interesting because it's definitely moving. It's definitely mobile, and we see interacting with others for the first time. It's not just two people with no good horses. These horses have all their legs, and they seem to be going into different directions. But the invitation here is still very Chariot and very Cancerian. We can see that these people on chariots are moving quickly. They're also moving through a space with a lot of cracks in it. Again, this can come back to the idea of where do we see flaws in our own ideology or in our own spaces that we are usually comfortable in and feel powerful. An invitation that I think is really beautiful here is that this person is actually reaching out to someone who's not on a horse. So how does that feel and read to you? Is this person using their chariot as a place of supporting others? That's actually a really cool and interesting way of looking at it. Or is this person on the ground trying to pull that person out of maybe an unsafe place that they might feel empowered by, but might not be of that person's highest good? As we see these cracks, we can almost take that as flaws in our foundation, right? Cracks in the pavement or cracks in our home that we see in maybe a wall or in the foundation that we are standing on show us that it's not perfect. Nothing is. But this invitation feels super Cancerian because we can see there's that idea of connecting, community, and supporting each other. It might feel very chaotic, but there's a halo for all of these people. There's divinity between all of these people. And it kind of shows that sometimes we can't just get out by ourselves, but we have to work together as a society to move out and through certain ideals that are not helpful for us as a collective. We can see there's movement. We can see there's change here. We can see that maybe we're not all on the same path, but we're all trying to find which direction is the right one for us and trying to support each other in that movement. The ground is not stable. We don't know exactly where we're going, but we know for a fact that something needs to change. Whether that's reaching out to others, whether that's just releasing control and taking our hands off and out so that we're just being open to the experience. Cancer energy comes through to me for this season as being one of check in on your friends. Bless me. Bless us all. Because it's not about just what we are feeling instinctively. I think what happens for us a lot of the time in Cancer season is the time to connect. It's time to mother ourselves, nurture ourselves, but mother our collective and each other. Check in and ask, are you okay? Are we okay? Am I okay? We don't know unless we ask, and we won't know unless we're really tapping into getting out of the chariot and realizing that the chariot, Cancer, is not just us, but our shell, our protective layer, how we support and mother ourselves. So as you connect with Cancer season, the chariot season, take those things that I said as maybe an invitation. Perhaps you looked at these cards and kind of came to a totally different conclusion that is so real to you. Good. Tap into that magic. Because Cancer season is really a powerful time to tap into our emotional selves, our physical selves, and our intuitive selves. This is our first dive into the water element. This is also the initiator of summer. So do it with joy, but do it with softness. We're all molting our shells right now, so it can be really challenging. We're all very vulnerable. And if you're not willing to molt your shell, it's time to get really vulnerable rather than pinchy. So that's my feedback on the season. Gonna be making some more videos, I think, around retrogrades because we have so many going on right now. It's a retrowade season. And yeah, whether that resonated with you or not, whether you found that helpful or not, thank you for just stopping by and being a part of this, I guess. And as always, be good, be beautiful, and be safe, family. From Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Goodbye.